Hey, AJ. Thanks for joining the HelloPrenup Podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about you and how you started Brooklyn FI.
Yeah, so my name's AJ Ayers. I run a financial advisory, wealth management, tax preparation, business owner advisory firm called Brooklyn FI. We're a fully remote firm now. We did start in Brooklyn. My story to become a financial advisor is kind of twisty and turny. I started as a book editor. I was working in academic publishing. Then I worked for a music website called Bandcamp, which is a job I loved. I was working as a music journalist. And basically, long story short, was making real money for the first time, was looking around to figure out, what do I do with the extra money in my checking account? I should probably invest it. Couldn't really find anyone who was speaking to me. I was like, I'm a smart person. I'm a journalist. This can't be that hard. So I thought, I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to start interviewing experts about this. And basically, I really fell in love with personal finance. Ended up through serendipity meeting my business partner, and we totally hit it off. He was a tax accountant looking to start a financial planning firm. I had interviewed a financial planner, and I was super excited by the profession. And we had this moment where we thought, we're in Brooklyn, we're young, our friends are young, successful creatives. I think there's a gap in the market here. Let's do financial advisory for people who aren't being served by the rest of the industry. And Brooklyn FI was born.
That is so interesting. And what a hard pivot from being a book editor to a music journalist.
I have in my industry, you meet people and they're like, I'm a career changer. I was a banker or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I did a pretty hard left turn.
You know a thing about career changing.
Yeah, for sure.
And what about the traditional finance methods didn't appeal to you?
It's not so much the methods, it's just the way that the financial services industry kind of grew up was first around, ensuring men's income. That's really where the history of personal finance and financial services comes from is, the man is the earner. Yeah. What if he passes away or what if he's disabled and can't earn income? Yeah. We need to have insurance products to make sure that the family is protected. That's where this whole thing comes from. Yeah. Then we thought, okay, insurance isn't the only way we can do this. We can invest. So, then we get the rise of the broker dealers and the traditional investment firms who are going to look after people's money and invest their money in the stock market, which we do. Yeah. But, we kind of thought financial planning is so much more than what's in your investment portfolio. It's, are you buying your first house? Are you buying your second house? You're two people coming together, joining finances. People are getting married later in life. People have completely separate lives that they're joining. So, our brand of financial planning, our segment of the industry is really about someone's whole life, not just their investment portfolio.
So how should millennials and Gen Zs look at finances, investing, management services?
Our generation, and I'm going to say we're millennials, right? Let's just go ahead. Let's come out and say it, right? We're millennials and, our subsequent generations. We don't trust our parents, right? Yeah. They screwed up the economy in the 2008 financial crisis. So, our approach to financial services and trusting the industry is we don't, millennials shouldn't trust financial advisors. So, what my firm and a lot of my peers do who run similar firms is it's all about trust. It's really just, talking to potential clients and saying, this is who I am. Here's how I'm going to manage your money. Here's what you're going to pay me. I'm going to be really transparent about my fees. Here's what you can expect. And, if you don't like it, that's okay. Let's part ways as friends. There's no reason to be cloak and dagger because millennials are really discerning. There is so much information out there. It's never been easier to be your own financial advisor. I really believe in accountability, which I'm sure we'll get into. So I really believe most people should have a financial advisor because we're human and we're bad at saving and investing without someone, cracking the whip, for lack of a better term.
It's very true. So, you work with millennials and Gen Zs. How do they view money differently than other generations?
It's a great question. I think it's not necessarily generational, but I do think kind of every human has there's this dichotomy, which is either you think that there's always going to be enough money and that's how you spend. And you just believe that, no matter what, money will always appear, or you believe there'll never be enough money and that's how people operate. So I would say the millennials generations is sort of more in that there's never going to be enough money camp because they went through 2008 with their parents and it's more expensive than ever to buy a house. We have inflation. I do think us younger people do have a bit of woe is me mentality. Yes, absolutely. The numbers show it is harder to buy a house than it ever has been. Wages are stagnant. Those are the facts. However, there's a lot of other things that are good and easier that I find that people don't take advantage of. So, this is kind of like tough love, and that's kind of how I treat my client relationships, which is I know it's hard, right? Let's acknowledge systematic racism, sexism, all of these things, but like you got one life to live. So like if you're not happy in your situation, do something to change about it. Do something to change it, right? Yeah. And like people are always like, whoa, I didn't expect to hear that from my financial advisor, but like it's so important. Money and emotion and our life decisions are so inextricably linked. Yeah. We can't ignore, how you feel about money when we're designing your stock market portfolio.
Yeah, I love the way that you're thinking about it. And I love the kind of straight talking, your friend who's going to give it to you exactly as it is, because people need to hear that, right? Yeah. And I think especially millennials, 24% of millennials are children of divorce. So we are really wary about what happens. Yeah, same. So in that vein, this is one of the reasons I think prenups have increased. Now, because you're working with a lot of millennials and Gen Zs, what do you see in terms of couples in managing money before they get married?
Okay, so let's talk about prenups. That's why we're here, right? Yeah. HelloPrenup, great company. I send my clients to you. It's not an advertisement. I do send my clients your way. But
thank you.
I actually don't think a lot of our clients go through with it. I make the recommendation. It's always funny. Yeah. I make a ton of recommendations to my clients. Yeah. And, invest in this, move your money to this account, buy this house, no problem. They'll listen to me. There's two things that I am bad at convincing clients to do. One is disability insurance, which we talked about, like insuring your income. It's really expensive. It's so important if you're a business owner to insure your income. Yep. Let's put a pin in that. The other one is prenups, right? Prenups to me are essential, not just because it's a document that protects you in the event that the marriage doesn't work out. I think it's absolutely essential in starting the conversation between two people who are going to spend their lives together about money. Yep. And if there was a magical way that we were all really great at talking about money with each other all the time, we wouldn't need prenups, right? We could have these easy conversations. We could have money dates. I've heard some other people talk about that. I have some opinions about that too. But we often don't do that, right? And I would say, and I'm sure you deal with this, with meeting people when they're a year out, 6 months, 3 months, 1 week from their wedding. Yeah. The wedding is really the first point where we start to talk about money. Maybe they live together, maybe there was a conversation about rent, but that was just one little decision. Having a wedding, how much it's going to cost is when we start to talk about it, and then we get to prenups, which is like, all right, everyone pull out everything you got. Let's look at what we have, what we don't have, and what are our shared goals, and do they align, right? I've been through a questionnaire on your website, and really you're just asking people like, how do they view money? How do they view money in their future? And I think it's so important. So I love prenups. Honestly, I would love for everyone to get a prenup, but even just going through the exercise of talking about it, I think is a really big step.
I totally agree. And I think that by the time couples get to the prenup process, ideally, they will have already talked about these things. They will have had conversations about shared finances. They will have conversations about how much is in savings, how much debt do you have, are you receiving trust distributions, right? That's one that I see hidden a lot, is the person who is getting, $1 million from their trust every single year doesn't want to tell their future spouse that information. And it will come out during the prenup process, which is kind of crazy. You also see people hiding debt from each other. So again, ideally, they will have had these conversations. But in instances where they haven't, right, I have ideas on how these conversations should be brought up. But what do you think?
Yeah, I have a similar experience where people will come to a financial advisor for the first time. One spouse, maybe their company is going public, and that's why they reached out to me. And their partner, their boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever, is going to join the relationship because they're engaged now. Yeah. And I'm sitting in this meeting live and I'm learning, there's $1 million trust distribution. Or on the other end of the spectrum, I'm $450,000 in student loan debt. Yeah. Or I've got credit card debt. And credit card debt I find is like the most kind of, let's sweep it under the rug, let's hide that kind of thing.
Interesting.
How do you start these conversations? Everyone's different. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. What I tell all of my friends, what I like beat into them is like, you just have to start. Yeah. It's like sex. It's like super uncomfortable. Yeah. Like you just got to say like, hey, babe. Yeah. Babe is weird. I don't call my husband babe. That's actually our safe word, by the way. If we're ever like, that's like if we're ever like getting kidnapped or something, and I like the code word is like, hey, baby, which would be like so jarring. That would be like, I need help.
Clearly she's been kidnapped.
Anyway, side note, hey, baby, let's sit down. Like we're going to get married or we're moving in together. Like I need to know. I've been thinking about this idea a lot of the fiduciary. Yeah. So you work roughly in finance, you know, the fiduciary, which is that you put others' interests ahead of yours at all times. Yeah. As a CFP, like we have to sign a fiduciary oath.
Yeah.
And I've started to think of this idea as being a fiduciary for your partner, meaning acting in their best interests at all times, putting their interests ahead of your own. Obviously, both of you have to do that for it to work. Yeah. But I love this idea of, hey, this is really awkward. I know we don't want to talk about this, but the longer we wait, the bigger this like big, nasty, scary bug under the rug is going to, you know, it's going to eat away at our relationship. Yeah. And you mentioned divorce, like most divorces end because of money issues or money misunderstandings. You know, that story you told about someone hiding their trust distributions, like why? Like why do people do that? I don't know how to fix it, but I just think starting the conversation, talking to your friends more about money is the way to do it.
So for couples who are moving in together and they're thinking about having this conversation because now they're going to have to be splitting bills and paying rent together, how do you recommend they go about splitting bills? Is it like 50-50? Is it proportional? We get this question a lot.
It has to start from a conversation, and it has to come from a place of empathy. Mm-hmm. I always tell my clients, yes, right now in this moment, someone might be making 75% more than the other person. But if you're really choosing to have a life together, meaning you're moving in together, which means you're pretty serious, which is kind of forever, right? It's unlikely that you will both be contributing exactly the same amount to the household in any given year. And throughout your lives, whether you're throughout the course of your relationship, whether it's 3 years or 75 years, you know, you're going to be contributing different amounts at different times. So I personally hate when people go, well, I'm going to pay 55% of the rent, and you're going to pay 45% because this is my salary. And then what about family distributions? True. What about other income sources? So it has to be a conversation. I think it has to start with, what are you comfortable with? Yeah. It's not, you know, that's information, right? When you're making these big, scary, uncomfortable, nasty decisions, what is your partner comfortable with? And then you say what you're comfortable with, and hopefully you can kind of meet somewhere in the middle. You know,
But how do you have this conversation?
So
do you have like a date where you sit down, dates. You have wine?
Yes, no wine, no drinking. Okay. That's very important. So no drinking. It's a Saturday or Sunday morning, whatever time you wake up usually, plus 3 hours. So it's not first thing in the morning. Okay. It's, you know, go for your walk, get your coffee, do whatever it is, you go to the gym, whatever you want to do in the morning, lay in bed for 3 hours. I don't care. So let's call it an 11 a.m. or a noon Saturday or Sunday morning, time to talk about money. Yeah. Don't do it monthly. That's too often. I don't want everyone to be talking about money in their relationship all the time. Okay. It's important that we acknowledge it and it's there. My husband and I do this quarterly.
Okay, quarterly. All right.
Quarterly, money.
Love that.
Sunday or Saturday coffee dates.
Interesting. So coffee dates once a quarter.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. At home, we're not, you know, we want to be in a comfortable space. We don't want to be having, you know, it can get emotional. Yeah. I've cried before. He's cried before. Well, he hasn't cried. But he's, you know, he gets emotional, you know, and we all, it's what are you uncomfortable or comfortable with? Because I think comfort is such an important word when we're talking about money, because it's not, you know, of course we could afford this or we can't afford this. It's like, what are you actually comfortable with? Because someone might be making a lot more money, but they have different savings goals. Maybe they're not comfortable spending as much as you are on an apartment if you're going to be splitting the rent or you know, buying a house together. Yeah. You know, we have a ton of clients who are buying homes together and they're not legally married, which is totally fine, but that's a whole other set of you know, legal things we have to think about when you aren't married, because we have to protect everybody.
Completely. And I always recommend that couples talk about what it is they want out of life. So I always use this example, like, do you want to retire at 40 and travel the world? Do you want to buy a house together and have 3 kids? Like, what are those ultimate life goals? And at the end of the day, a prenup is a conversation about life goals. So from your perspective, you know, I would assume that the smaller money conversations also lead into and have impact on the larger conversations. Yep. How do couples assess what it is that they want out of life?
Yep. And this is a great question, and this is why I do believe that most couples should talk to a financial advisor or financial planner, because no matter who you go to, you know, I think our breed of financial planning is the best, because we start with goals. The first conversation we have with our clients is, if you had all the money in the world, how would you live your life differently? Yeah. That's the first question.
That's a great question.
And then there's a series of questions we take them through. And the first meeting is this, like, you know, bare your heart and soul. What do you want out of life? And often what comes up is not just, you know, yes, I want to beautiful farm where I can invite my family. It's always about relationships, right?
Yeah.
It's always about like, well, if I had all the money, I would, sometimes I wouldn't quit my job. So it's like, I like my job, but I would work less and I would spend more time with my partner or my family, or I would take time off to start a family. So I think these goal conversations leading with that is the most important thing. And that's, I mean, if you're not doing that already, like you are setting your relationship up for failure. Like it's really hard to continue being distracted by daily life or tragedy if you are not on the same page kind of from day one. And look, things change. We want to buy a house today. Someone gets a job in, Southeast Asia. That's an amazing opportunity. Let's pick up for 2 years. Like that's okay. That's what a financial plan is. It moves and it changes. So checking in with those goals is also important. Not just the one-time big bang.
Yeah, and money is never really just about money, right?
Exactly. And, I think the shared goals conversation, approaching it from money will bring up so many other things. And it's, I want to set expectations. It's not going to be solved in one coffee date.
Yeah.
Like this is not like, oh, we fixed everything. I showed him my debt and, he said he didn't want to have kids. I'm good with that. And we want to buy a house. Like, cool, we're good. Took 45 minutes. No, this is going to be like a couple months long process. But, life moves fast. So, like, we're very realistic about the decisions our clients are making and helping them make decisions as they come in. We make a financial plan and we always joke, like, we don't print it out because we'd have to rip it up the moment you walk out the door because it changed, because something in your life, was different.
Smart. How do you think student loan debt has shaped the priorities of millennials when it comes to marriage and family planning?
I think it's delayed it significantly. I think student loan debt is one of the greatest boogeyman, that's not even a strong enough word. It's one of the greatest detriments to our generation because it is so stressful to start your life and be behind. So, I moved to New York and my student loan payment was something like $300 or $400 a month, which was insane. That was like half of my rent. And I was just like, how am I going to do this? So, and that was a mild case. We see clients with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, law school, medical school. So I think it is basically one of the main culprits for the reason people are delaying decisions, like finding partners, getting married, starting families, absolutely buying houses. I mean, having debt will literally prevent you from buying a house because you don't meet the debt to income requirements. So student loans are a massive problem. I don't have a solution. Unfortunately, I don't think any politicians have a solution. My best advice for people is to get help, think about a plan, have an end date for when it's going to be paid off. It might be 30 years in the future, but that's kind of the only way to put this really big problem in a box is, don't think about if it's $300,000, don't think about that number. Just think about the monthly payment and get it done and be honest.
And how you're going to get through it. Yeah.
And, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about taking on debt, I would take a very serious, hard look in the mirror. It's really hard when you're 18 or 17. I was 17 when I made this decision. Like, I want to go to this fancy liberal arts school on the East Coast. Sure, I'll go into debt. No problem. It's student loan debt. It's good, right? It's my education. I don't regret it. I know people who do regret it.
Yeah. I have so many friends in the same position. Where it's like you didn't know what you were really signing up for. You just knew you had to go to college, right? There's always a sentiment like, you must go to college. This is very important. Without college, especially for our generation, without college, you're not going to get a job, right? So you're forced like into this decision. And college is expensive. And then maybe you graduate, and like I graduated college in 2009. And there were really no jobs. Right? So then it's like, okay, a lot of people I know went to grad school. I didn't go right to law school, but a lot of people went to grad school. They chose, it was business school or law school, right? Because now I need to delay another 3 to 4 years. And I have a lot of friends who've walked out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and absolutely no idea how to pay it off. And I really empathize with them because it's a hard position to be in when you're in your 30s, well, late 20s, early 30s, and now you want to get married and have kids. Kids are expensive. Weddings are expensive.
Yeah, I mean, we say this all the time, like the math doesn't math. And, we're talking about a couple $100s in a monthly payment. Like, well, that's a lot of money. That's the delay on going from renting to buying. That's the delay on deciding to stay home and raise your child as opposed to paying for daycare. Like, there's a lot of decisions that, I don't think we can underestimate how detrimental student loan debt is to upwardly mobile working professionals, and this it's class blind, right? It's even folks who came from money, who had comfortable childhoods.
Yeah.
And then there's people who were duped. The stories that break my heart are the universities that went under, and they took out hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt, and then their degree is invalid or what have you.
How do you address the topic of prenups with your clients? And do you think that more clients now are open to prenups as part of the financial planning process?
Yes, I do think they are more open to it. I bring it up as part of the process. Hey, you're getting married. The first question everyone asks me is, how much should I spend on my wedding? I send them to my blog post, which is how much you should spend on your wedding, which is different for everyone, of course.
How much should they spend on their wedding?
$45,000 is the correct answer.
$45,000.
That's the correct answer.
Wow.
Yep.
That's higher than I thought you.
That's the answer.
Okay. Okay, great.
If it's not New York or California, maybe a little less.
Okay.
Anyway.
I love that.
Index that for inflation, but that's about right. So, how much should I spend on my wedding? Look, as your financial planner, I want to mention something that I think is important. As you know, we do a lot of risk management in financial planning. That means insurance. That means planning for your death. We are also going to have a will and an estate plan. So a prenuptial agreement is just part of a good financial plan. So I think, I'm in a kind of privileged position because they get to blame it on me, right? I get to say, I am recommending this to you. And then it's not one spouse bringing it up and making it awkward. So I think that's another great reason to kind of have that third party in the room. You had asked earlier about how do you start these really uncomfortable, horrible conversations? Well, a great way is to bring someone else into the room who's a professional, And that could be a financial therapist, that could be a couples therapist, could be a lawyer, it could just be someone else who's kind of a moderator. These conversations are so hard. Yeah. I mean, I literally do this for a living, and they're still hard between my husband and I, my mom and I, my sister and I, my dad and I. So for prenups, it's, you got to get it done. Here's some resources. We send them to HelloPrenup. We send them to a few other, boutique lawyers if they want something a little more engaged. Yep. And I would say most people don't get it done. Yeah. We make the recommendation. Some will start the process, but it's important. I believe in them. I haven't figured out quite how to get people to implement them.
Why don't you think people finish it?
I think it's just one of those things that starts to get uncomfortable when you're planning a wedding and we're only human and you're going, oh my God, we just spent $10,000 on flowers and your mom hates my cousin and there's all this drama and am I making the right decision? I'm supposed to sign a prenup that's going to determine what happens if we break up? I think it's honestly just too much of an emotional load. I don't know how you feel about this, but I like post-nups. I don't know if they're as enforceable, but I just like the idea of okay, we did the thing. Yeah. We started the conversation before we signed the document, but now we're married. Now it's a post-honeymoon. We're kind of wedded bliss. Okay, now let's have the conversation.
And tell me a little bit more about what you like about post-nups.
I love post-nups because I would love for everyone to get a prenup. Yeah. It's not realistic for anyone to get a prenup. I didn't get a prenup. It was too hard. I got engaged in May and married in December, and I started a business. Wasn't on the table, right? So a post-nup is a chance for you to go through your big day, go through all the emotions, write all the checks of having a wedding, going on a honeymoon, coming back to real life. You're in post-wedded bliss. Now you're with your new partner, start your life together, have a real honest conversation about money in a good, happy place once all the stress of the wedding is done.
Yeah. I love that. I think post-nups can be great, especially for couples who have missed the opportunity to get a prenup. I always say, if you can get a prenup because they are generally more enforceable. That won't always be the case. I think I always compare post-nups to prenups of 15, 20 years ago, right? Yeah. They existed, but they weren't as readily enforced. Yeah. I think post-nups are becoming more and more enforced, which is really important. But I think they can be really valuable for couples who are already married and in a position where they're okay, I'm going to get X amount of inheritance from my parents. I want to make sure that's protected. Or a lot of times the parents are the ones, the in-laws are the ones who are dictating that the couple get a post-nup because they didn't have a prenup. Yep. And in those instances, I think post-nups are so valuable, and it gives the couple an opportunity to reevaluate parts of their relationship, how they manage money, how they hold assets, and especially in today's day and age where it's so easy and accessible to start your own business, especially online. And so how do you protect those assets if you're already married? Well, a post-nup is the best way to do that.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about with the prenup, people feel like, oh, well, I missed the chance. Or it's like a will, like before you die, like you get one shot. Like when you're dead, that's it. Sorry. Like you don't get a second chance. There's no like post-death will. Like, sorry.
Nope.
Posture. Yeah, I don't know what that's called. But a post-nup, it's a second chance, right? And there's kind of no expiration date on it. I love deadlines. So if I could, I would say you have a year to get it done.
Yep.
I also gave myself a 5-year deadline to finish my wedding album, and we're about to hit 6 years and I haven't done it. So
it's not done.
I get it. I mean, that's the thing about all this. Like, I have so much empathy for clients because, we've been. It sounds like I'm a year younger than you. Like, we've been through all of this. So, like, me and all of the financial planners that work at Brooklyn FI, like, we're empathetic, and coming from a place of empathy is how you get things done.
Yes.
And I think having a conversation with your person you're about to marry during a stressful time, like, it's kind of a lot to throw in the money conversation.
Yeah.
So while I would love everyone to get a prenuptial agreement, I realize that it isn't always realistic.
Yes. Awesome.
But it is really important to get a will. Do not skip on that because you might die tomorrow.
Yeah, we always recommend it. When you're getting a prenup, do your estate planning at the same time.
Great.
And people tend to, it's like once they get the prenup done, they're getting married and they're like, we'll deal with the estate planning later. Just do it all in one shot because a lot of times you can include provisions in your prenup that point to your will or your trust. And if you do all of that at once, you're in a much better position than if you try and piecemeal it later and then you can't remember what is where.
Totally. Yeah, the less lawyer visits and signatures and notaries we have to deal with, the better. So just do it all in one chunk. I totally agree.
Agreed. For couples where one partner is either a startup founder or an entrepreneur, what unique financial challenges do they face?
Welcome to hell, as we like to say.
We love it here.
The good uniques are that you have likely large bursts of income. We call them liquidity events, right?
Yeah.
If you're a startup founder or even a startup employee on the early side of things, you could have a massive liquidity event. Or if you're a business owner, you could be selling part of your business to investors. You could have a complete exit. So that's a positive, right? That's the unique challenge, that there's a ton of income coming in and we got to manage the tax consequences of that. That's my specialty in particular.
Yeah.
What are the downsides of that, right? Well, we call it lumpy income, right? We might have years where we're making a ton of money or we're being given big checks or grants or what have you that are supposed to last 2 or 3 years of living expenses or runway for the business. So lumpy income is difficult. That's, something that you and your partner have to have a conversation about. Are we going to be okay? Is our lifestyle going to be able to survive these kind of boom and bust periods? The instability of having a partner who's a business owner, you've been through this as a startup founder. I've been through this as a business owner and startup founder. Like, there's so much good, but if you're starting a business, you're not taking vacation for the first 2 years. No. I would, I'm always like, if I could do it all over again, I would have taken time off. There's no way I would have taken time off because you're so in it. You love it. There's so much adrenaline, especially if it's working, right? You just want to give everything you can to the business. So, I think as the partner of a business owner, you kind of have to be ready for that. And as the business owner person in the partnership, you have to prepare your partner for that and be extra kind. I remember sitting it was 9:00 during tax season with my business partner being like, we got to reminding each other to text our partners to be like, miss you. I'm not coming home until 1 a.m. but I'm thinking about you. Sorry, I'm a business owner. Other downsides, just regular life decisions are harder as a business owner. Try to get a mortgage. Try to explain to a banker that you own 2 partnerships. Some years are profitable and some years are wildly profitable and some years are wildly not. You're not going to get that mortgage. So that partner who got a nice gift from their parents for a down payment on a house, you guys aren't going to be able to qualify because of your income. So those are just kind of the big things that I like to prepare clients for when they're thinking about starting a business or they're thinking about marrying a business owner.
So how do startup founders or entrepreneurs, business owners, how do you separate out your income or your lumpy income in a way that works for years to come?
Yeah, I mean, that takes serious budgeting and planning. That's, people always poo-poo having good QuickBooks or good books, right? It's so important to know how much is coming in and how much you're spending. And that's an easy thing to kind of just let go, especially when, when the business is, when you have a lot of revenue and there's a lot of customers coming in, whatever you're doing, it's easy to forget the finances finances of the business. So, look, I'm a part accountant blood. It is so important to know how much is coming in and what's your runway. And a lot of, most startups fail because they run out of money.
Right.
And most, let's say, marriages fail because they run out of money, right? When you get to that place of stress of like, there's no other levers to pull, we're out of financing, you fail, you implode, right? And that can be, obviously financially devastating, but also emotionally devastating to the person who started it or was very involved in it.
Yep. Is there any advice or anything else you want to tell us about budgeting for lumpy income? Because I know that's something that a lot of people who are in the startup space experience.
Yeah, I like to think of it as like a starvation mode budget.
Yeah.
And this is between you and your partner. You both have to be able to kind of shift into this, knowing that there's an end in sight, but knowing that this year you might say no to the weddings that you have to travel for.
Yeah.
You might say no to your parents to come home for Thanksgiving this year. Yeah. You actually have to have conversations where, are we going to be okay through these periods of famine, knowing that hopefully there's a big feast coming later. Yeah. But that the rice and beans thing, my husband and I talk about that all the time. We're like, are we good? Our lifestyle has inflated quite a bit, but we're always checking in, could this all go away tomorrow and could we survive? And the answer has to be yes. Otherwise, what are we doing?
If you had to pick one piece of advice that you wish couples would follow, just one, what would it be?
Come to the relationship with empathy. Don't shame your partner for spending too much money. Don't shame your partner for hiding money that you didn't know about. We all have our own money issues. We're all fucked up, right? We all had weird childhoods and weird relationships with money, whether you had money or had too much money or had not enough money and not enough food on the table. Yeah. We all have baggage when it comes to money. And you need to realize that about everyone. And you can get mad. You can get mad for 20 minutes. You can throw a fight. You can slam the door. But don't go to bed mad. Have empathy when we're talking about money, because everyone's head is really messed up.
You said that people are either savers or they're spenders. Mm-hmm. What is the best combination for a relationship?
Ooh, good question. Yeah, so it's either, people who believe there's always enough money and people who believe there's never going to be enough money.
Yeah.
I would love for everyone to be savers, but I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah.
And I think you can have someone who always thinks they're going to be enough money compatible with someone who is a scrimper and, is always worried they're going to run out of money. I think that can work as long as everyone is on the same page and as long as people are willing to compromise. That's, again, I'm coming back to this, comfort. What are you comfortable with? If you're shopping or travel addiction is causing you to go into serious credit card debt, that's probably going to make your partner uncomfortable because that's scary, you know. And if it's a consistent pattern that we keep coming back to, you're putting your partner in jeopardy too. You're making that, obviously you're uncomfortable, but you can't stop that. So I do think, a true spending, it's a form of addiction, and that's not something that I'm qualified to deal with. And I've seen it before. I've had clients who have serious spending addictions, and we refer them out to people who can help with that, because that's not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is investing your money and protecting your money. It's not, helping you save more of it.
How much should people be, I hear these ratios all the time, you should spend X amount on your rent or your mortgage. You should spend X amount on clothing. You should how should people apportion their income to spending and saving categories?
So there's the 50-30-20 rule where we're supposed to spend, I think it's 50% on your essentials like rent and insurance, 30% on whatever you want, food, clothes, blah, 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 and then 20% savings for the long term. That's fine, honestly. I like that rule. Forget the 50 and the 30 part. Let's just focus on the 20 part. As long as you're saving 20% of your income. And by saving, I mean in your 401k, in a long-term investment account. I don't mean in a bank account that you're going to pull from every month. We're talking about long-term savings we're not going to touch for many decades. Spend the rest on whatever you want. And I think that's where, the personal part of personal finance is. If you're living in New York City, you have to spend more on rent. It's expensive to live here. So it's not realistic to say, only spend 36% of your income on rent. That's just not possible. If you live here and your job is here and you want to walk to work, you're going to spend more money. So you might have to scrimp elsewhere. You might have to cut down your, eating out budget or clothing budget or what have you. But as long as the secret to personal finance is so simple, it's spend less than you make and save 20% of your income, period. That's it. That's the secret. And if that's not possible, you have to spend less or make more. So I empathize with people who are like, that's impossible. How can I do that based on my salary? Well, time to probably make a big change either in your lifestyle or in your career. And I say that again with this like hard, like just do it. It's so easy. Like I feel silly saying that, but it really is that simple.
I love that. I do think you have simplified it in a way that is really digestible. And I think for most people, if you're living in one of these big cities, especially East Coast and West Coast cities, life is expensive, right? Groceries are expensive. Rent is crazy expensive. And so the idea that I can really boil it down to save 20% and then apportion the rest of my income the way that I see fit or what matters to us as a couple makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. One of the early when I was working in book publishing, one of the early financial memories that I have, and remember, I didn't know anything. I was an English major. I was sitting in this little conference room, and I was probably 23 at the time. I was making $28,000 a year. And, the financial advisor from the 401k company came in and was doing little personal financial appointments. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, we're going to talk about my 401k and what we invest in. Yeah. And he sits down and he goes, tell me what you spend. And I wrote out, my rent and my this. And he's like, okay, so you have a spending problem. And I was like, do I? I'm literally buying rice and beans. I wasn't spending any money because I had no money. I had a second job working as a barback to try to pay for my student loan payments. Yeah. And this guy was sitting there shaming me about me spending too much money. Yeah. I mean, he was kind of right. He was like, something has to give. And the answer was my income was too low, period. I couldn't afford to work at this job and live in the city. So it's a very interesting, the old school versus the new school where millennials are going I can't do this. And the old school's going, well, figure it out, just make it happen. Yeah. And no one's we're both right.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was working as an attorney, I was working with a client whose parents were dictating that he have a prenup. He and his fiance have a prenup. Mm-hmm. Their wedding was something like 6 weeks away. And he obviously hadn't had that conversation with his future wife. And it created a lot of stress in the relationship between the future wife and her future in-laws, to the point where I don't think they spoke for years after the wedding. I mean, it was really, really detrimental. How would you recommend people have conversations with their parents about future inheritance?
Kind of the same way you should have a conversation with your partner. It's you just have to start. There's no secret way. We talked about earlier having a coffee date, a stress-free, not during Thanksgiving break. That's when emotions are high. Yeah. If your parents aren't in the same city, it's a Zoom call. Yeah. Hey, mom and dad, no big news to share anything. I just would love to catch up on Zoom. Yeah. I have some questions to ask you. Again, blame your financial advisor. This is what I tell my clients all the time. My financial advisor made me have this conversation with you. If you don't have a financial advisor, just make it up. Just you have to have the conversation. Hey, mom and dad, I'm planning my financial life.
Sure.
Or mom or dad or aunt or whoever is the older generation, or grandpa, grandma. I am starting to plan my future, and my financial life is going to be shaped by whether there's money coming in or whether I might need to lay out some cash. And I would love to support you, but I want to plan for it. So can you give me a little bit of insight into your own financial planning? Sure. Do you have long-term care insurance? Do you have a 401k saved? Do you have your will done? Because sometimes they don't. Oh my God, please get your will done. For the love of God. Please update your 401k beneficiary so it doesn't go to your first wife from 1963 who's dead and no one's ever heard from. Yeah. So we hear these horror stories, but come from a place of empathy. Yeah. It's hard for everyone to talk about money. It's hard for your parents. Imagine your parents didn't save and they're so embarrassed because they gave everything to you. They put all their money into sending you to college and they don't have anything saved. Yeah. You go, that's okay. We will figure it out together. Thank you so much for telling me. And that's all you might get, right? So then we have to have a follow-up conversation. But I can't stress how important these conversations are. We've got hundreds of clients and, on the perfect end of the spectrum, mom and dad were, they're always attorneys or they're always financial advisors who do the planning, or they had some guy who made them do it. Or girl, usually it's a guy if they're old. They say, here's the documents, here's everything, it's ready to go. And on the other end of the spectrum, it's, we had no idea, mom's sick, dad passes away same year, and there's debt, the house is, over mortgaged, and someone's in a care facility they can't afford, and now the kids have to drop their lives, move there, which of course they're often willing to, and happy to do, but it's just good information to have.
And boomers are set to transfer down something like $60 trillion plus.
Yeah.
The number keeps growing every time I check in wealth. And I think the conversation around inheritance can still be equally as hard for those with a lot to pass down. Mm-hmm. And I've seen this in prenups because parents will be asked what that inheritance looks like so that it can be listed in the inheritance section or anticipated inheritance section of the prenup. And the parents just don't want to talk about it. They don't even want to give them a number. Yep. So if that is the case, what do you recommend people do?
I don't know. I mean, yeah, take your parents out to dinner 10 times, and on the 10th time, you might get the answer. I understand. And I think you had asked earlier, what's the difference between millennials and their parents?
Yeah.
I think our generation is going to be like, here's what we have. Yeah. Here's the deal. We're going to be more transparent. We're just used to that. We grew up differently. They were in a very different, social setting than we were. How do you get that information? It's so important to get that information. It really is. And if your parents are hiding it from you, your spouse or your partner is going to think you're hiding it from them. And then you can tell your parents, just so you know, you're setting up my marriage to fail by withholding this information from me. Because how do you expect me to be open with my partner? I don't want that for us. I'm sorry that your marriage wasn't open and communicative, but I really want mine to be. So can you please share this with me? And of course, we have so many blended families now because there was so much divorce in the 80s and 90s and continues to be.
Yep.
It's not just mom, dad, and kids. It's mom, dad, new family, new wife, other kids, cousins, and that's when it gets a lot more complicated. What are we trying to do with the prenup? Just like what are we trying to do with an estate plan? We're trying to avoid conflict and hurting people. That's what we're trying to do here. So if we can have these conversations before, the prenup or the estate plan is just a document that solidifies what we've already talked about.
Yeah, I try to I like to look at it this way. If you don't include any number in the anticipated inheritance section on the financial schedule of a prenup, you're leaving that money up to risk, right? And there's no statute that says you have to list the amount of anticipated inheritance. But if you don't, in the future, what that means is you're opening up the door for an argument that from the other side that, well, if I had only known that there was a $20 million estate here that my spouse was inheriting, I never would have signed this document. So I'd like to remind all the parents out there who might be listening to this who are really hesitant to talk to their kids about what that anticipated inheritance looks like. You're really leaving things up to chance if you don't give them that information in advance, especially when they're getting married.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what our clients are going through is, they have a lot of money in their 30s. That's our specialty, is dealing with folks who are of sudden wealth through an exit of some kind of liquidity event, which is also the name of our podcast, by the way. They're having kids and they are going through the same thing that their parents did, which is, okay, I'm raising these kids. I want to raise good citizens of the world. Yep. I want them to have everything they need, but I don't want to spoil them. I don't want them to grow up knowing that there's $20 million coming to them. So we actually talk a lot about charitable giving and figuring out what is a sustainable amount of money. And we do the calculations, into our, I just had a kid, my client just had has a 1-year-old, let's figure out, how much money that kid's going to need by the time they're 100. And let's make it 105 because people will probably be living longer by then.
And college is more expensive.
And college is way more expensive. Of course, we put all those inflation adjusters on everything. Which is all to say, we're in this position right now as millennials where we're dealing with our parents. Our parents are, they're starting to die and pass on money or pass on debt. We're dealing with our own stuff. We're trying to start families. We're buying houses. We're buying second homes. We're starting companies. And we're having kids. And our kids are in, nursery school talking to other kids. There was just an article last week, I forget where it was, but it was just like, my preschooler is like, Mommy, why don't we have as much money as the person down the road? They're going to Paris next weekend. So you're having money conversations with multiple generations.
Oh,
There's a lot on our shoulders right now. So.
Totally. I have money conversations with my 4-year-old.
Yes.
We have this entire system laid out. It's so important to me that she understands money. Yep. So she gets paid for doing certain chores around the house that are above and beyond what her baseline is. And then the way that she splits up that money is kind of systematic. So she's got to save 50%. And then the remainder is split between starting her own business and spending.
Love it.
And so it's really fun because she's learning what it means to spend money. When we go to a store and she looks at something that she wants, and like her favorite store in the entire world is TJ Maxx, right?
Okay.
She can buy
She's
all
a
the things.
Maxxinista.
She's a Maxxinista to the core. And we'll look at the price of something and then we'll work on, she's 4, so she's not like counting money as well as, she will be in a couple of years. But we're really able to work through what it looks like to spend and what it looks like to save.
I love that.
So again, I think having conversations with kids as young as possible is key because then it just becomes a part of their narrative.
Yep.
Thank you so much, AJ, for joining us today. It has been such a pleasure. Where can people find you?
You can find me at brooklynfi.com. That's my financial advisory firm. You can find my writing about money on Substack. It's called Money Changes Everything. And my business partner and I have a podcast where we talk about all things personal finance, and that's called The Liquidity Event. This has been so fun, Julia. Thank you for having me.